All right, all you positive heads. On this week's Soul Share episode, I'm very excited to have Dr. David Spiegel here with me on the show. David serves as the Associate Chair of Psychiatry and Behavioral Sciences at Stanford University School of Medicine and is the director for both the Center on Stress and Health and the Center for Integrative Medicine. Dr. Spiegel has published 13 books, over 400 scientific journal articles, 175 book chapters exploring stress, anxiety, depression, trauma, and the power and incredible potential of hypnosis. Hello, David. Welcome to the show, my friend.
Hello, Brandon. I'm very glad to be here with you.
Yeah, it's funny how, we talk a lot about synchronicity on the show, and I woke up this morning to my girlfriend partner, sighing deeply about another night where she didn't sleep that well. And I'm like, as soon as I pull up, I get up and get ready for this. And it's like, one of the very first things is all about how hypnosis can help with sleep and your app. And so we're going to dig into all of that. And I'm excited to share with her and have her explore it as well. But let's start with start at the beginning with my cliche opening question, which is this. You're in an elevator. The woman next to you looks over, says, "What's your passion?" You have 10 floors to answer. What do you say?
Well, I hope it's going up, not going down. My passion is helping people to help themselves, Brandon. We have this big brain. It's our major evolutionary advantage sitting on top of our shoulders, but it does not come with a user's manual. So that means that we don't know at the beginning everything we can do with our brain to help ourselves control our focus of attention, help our bodies feel more relaxed, deal with stress, fear, anxiety, get to sleep and get back to sleep if you wake up at night. Control pain. It's a remarkable tool for helping people to control pain. Deal with bad habits like vaping and smoking cigarettes. So it's an opportunity that people carry within them. It's an undeveloped skill that many people can learn to use that can be tremendously helpful, can help them feel better while not exposing themselves to the risks of drugs like opioids, which are killing thousands of people every year in America. So I want to use the time I have to not only teach people about it, teach them how to use it, but disseminate it as widely as we can. So anybody who wants can give it a try and see how much they can learn to help themselves.
I love that. I think that's one of the great things that's, there's a lot of mixed bag of technological advancements and things that, double-edged sword, if you will, with things unfolding. But this is a great example of, something that, is typically not as easy to access now all of a sudden through someone like yourself who's helping to steward, an app that is you directly with the app is acting as actually almost like what I was reading about or hearing about the other day talking about AI advancements and how that's going to be one of the things that is going to be incredibly profoundly changing is we're going to have an AI doctor that knows everything about us and every bit of research that's ever done. And you're going to have your personal doctor who knows you and knows everything about medicine. And that's who's going to be helping you. It's like, it's sort of a version of that, right?
Well, in a sense, it's certainly making what makes it accessible right now as AI is developing. We're not yet using AI, although we may for language translation and things like that. Is that it's a capacity you carry within, and something that I teach my patients to use for themselves. Hypnosis is not something that I do to you; it's something you learn to do for yourself. And so everybody carries within themselves some ability to use this technique to focus their attention and solve problems in a very positive and helpful way.
Yeah. Amazing. Well, if you would give us a little bit of background. I always love to have some backstory on how my guests ended up where they are. So anything that feels relevant to share, please do.
Sure. Well, hypnosis, Brandon, is something of a genetic illness in my family. Both of my parents were psychiatrists and psychoanalysts.
Wow.
And so as I grew up, they told me I was free to be any kind of psychiatrist I wanted to be. And here I am.
They really gave you a range, didn't they?
Yeah, that's right. And I took full advantage of it. my father, just before he went off to combat in World War II in North Africa,
Mm.
was trained by a Viennese refugees named Gustav von Aschaffenburg, who escaped the Nazis in Europe, came here, was not able to get into the army, but had learned to use hypnosis because he had a smallpox scar on his forehead. And he was a forensic psychiatrist. And he noticed that when some of the inmates that he was interviewing were talking to him, their heads would sort of nod, they'd close their eyes, and they'd go into some kind of altered state.
Yeah.
And he was interested in that and learned about hypnosis and then taught young army doctors, as his contribution to the war effort, how to use it. And my father used it for pain control when soldiers were wounded in combat, for dealing with post-traumatic stress.
Wow.
And he found it very interesting and rather different from the psychoanalysis that he was studying. That was the big thing at the time.
Sure.
And he was going to give it up, but one of his supervisors, a brilliant woman named Frieda from Reichmann, said, don't worry about your reputation as an analyst. You're going to teach a course here at the Institute on hypnosis, and I know you are because I'm going to take it, so you better do it.
Wow.
And it kept him in the game, and he found after a while that he was getting more striking results with a few sessions of hypnosis than he was with years of 3 days on the couch talking to people or having them talk to him. And so he kept doing it. And so our dinner table conversations were pretty interesting. I would get to watch him make movies of patients every once in a while. And when I got to medical school, I signed up for a hypnosis course. I figured I got to learn this formally. And the first patient I ever used it with was a 16-year-old girl who was in Children's Hospital with status asthmaticus. That meant she could barely breathe. She was in a severe asthma attack. Her bronchioles were constricted.
Wow.
The nurse says she's in room 345, and I can hear the wheezing down the hall. So I followed the sound. Pretty 15-year-old redhead, bolt upright in bed, knuckles white, struggling for breath. Her mother's standing there crying. There's a nurse in the room. They had tried subcutaneous epinephrine twice. It hadn't worked. The next step was general anesthesia and steroids. And I didn't know what else to do. So I said, would you like to learn a breathing exercise? And she nodded. And so I got her hypnotized. And then I realized that we hadn't gotten to asthma in the course yet. So I came up with something very clever. I said, each breath you take will be a little deeper and a little easier.
Wow.
And within 5 minutes, she's lying back in bed. She's not wheezing anymore. Her mother stopped crying. The nurse ran out of the room. And I was rather amazed by this.
Wow.
My intern comes looking for me, and I figure he's going to pat me on the back and say, nice job, Spiegel. What did you do? He told me that the nurse had filed a complaint with the nursing supervisor that I had violated Massachusetts law by hypnotizing a minor without parental consent. Now, Massachusetts has a lot of weird laws, but that one is not on the books. And in any event, her mother was standing right next to me when I did it.
Yeah.
And this, Brandon, this is one of the things about hypnosis is that either people think it's ridiculous and it doesn't do anything, or it's really dangerous and must be illegal and lots of things like that. Neither of which is true.
Right.
And so the intern says, well, you've got to stop doing this. And I said, oh, really? Why? He said, well, it could be dangerous. And I said, I'll tell you what. I said, as long as she's my patient, I'm not going to tell her anything I know is not true. And this is already helping her. And so take me off the case if you want, but as long as she's my patient, I'm going to keep doing it. So he stomps off, and the intern, the resident, the chief resident, the attending had a council of war over the weekend. And they came back with a radical decision. They said, why don't we ask the patient? I don't think that had ever been done.
Well, now
before.
there's an idea.
Yeah, what a concept. And she said, I like this, and so we kept doing it.
Wow.
And I thought that anything that could help a patient that much violate a non-existent Massachusetts law and frustrate the head nurse had to be worth looking into. And I've been doing it ever since. And part of what I saw there, Brandon, is with my own eyes in a matter of a few minutes, a patient helping herself to get better.
Yeah.
And I thought there's real power here that we are just not using properly. And the misunderstandings about what hypnosis is have got to change. And I've been doing that my entire career. I figured if I just do enough research and my colleagues do enough research, and prove that it works, show how it works in the brain, and I'll be glad to discuss that with you and your listeners, that everybody would be using it now.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, I've been doing that for a very long time, but it hasn't happened. And so I want people to discover directly what a tremendous potential ability they have to focus their attention, to put outside of conscious awareness things that would ordinarily bug them in consciousness, and to change, to sort of put their usual self aside,
Yeah.
and try out being different.
Yeah.
And one of the things that scares people the most about hypnosis, this idea of suggestibility, and somebody can make you do anything that you don't want. And, many people have been in one of these silly shows where, the football coach dances like a ballerina.
Yeah.
That I don't like making fun of people anyway, especially with hypnosis. But there is a message in there, Brandon. And the message is, you can try out just seeing what it would be like to be different. Just put your usual self aside for a while and see what would happen if, instead of getting frustrated and angry at your body for the pain, which only makes it worse, you can teach your body to reprocess the pain signals and feel them differently, to filter the hurt out of the pain. So if you just try it, you see whether you like it. You see whether it helps you or not. And if it does, learn to use it. Right.
Yeah, it's really silly to think that at this point there's still some, any amount of people that don't realize how hypnotizable. I mean, commercials are hypnotized. Everything to some degree is, it's like, this podcast, the company name that my corporation is Television Studios that I sort of run it under. It's like Tell-A-Vision. That's what it's doing. And it is hypnotizing people. And, for better or for worse, right? Would you agree?
Yeah, I like the way you play with words, and you're right. We're social creatures. We shape our inner experience based on social input that we have, and that's just a part of being human. Hypnosis is a more specific, focused, and controlled way of doing that, of getting you to see an old situation from a new point of view, change your perception of it. And you're right, it's just an extension of the natural human influence that we have on one another, but it's also an internal skill. It's something you can learn to identify and master, so that if you choose to take in a suggestion, for example, my body is floating in a mountain lake, a hot tub, or floating in space, I can filter the hurt out of the pain, feel a sense of cool, tingling numbness, filter the hurt out of the pain.
I like that.
It can feel different. It's not simply you're suffering through it. You can change your perception of pain. Yeah. That's one of many things you can learn to do with hypnosis.
Well, Wim Hof has shown that, I think, with his ability to withstand incredible, things that most people can't imagine,
right.
dealing with.
Absolutely. Yogis do it. And changing breathing the way Wim Hof does. He has one rather intense way of doing it, but there are lots of ways of changing breathing. We also have some of these breathwork exercises as well as self-hypnosis on our Reverie app, which I hope people will give a try to and see how they can learn to use hypnosis for themselves, changing their breathing, changing their perception of pain, approaching problems from a positive rather than a negative point of view, and change their lives for the better.
Yeah. And we'll get into the app here in a few minutes as well, and tell people how they can get that. I'm curious what your thoughts are on susceptibility. A few times I've been exposed to, these sort of, production, the hypnotist is coming to, I remember the first time I was in college, we're going to have a hypnotist on Tuesday night, and people are, using their shoes as, binoculars and that whole thing we've all seen. And, at the time I'm thinking, I think these people are faking it. I didn't go into an altered state. I attempted, and I found myself, one of the things that I'm particularly interested in is past life stuff, and like Michael Newton's book Journey of Souls, and people supposedly exploring that sort of thing through hypnosis as a doorway. And I've attempted that. I don't feel like I've really had success, ever in my 3-4 times wanting to be hypnotized. So I'm curious what your thoughts are on that.
Well, Brandon, people differ a good deal in their ability to experience hypnosis. Hypnotizability in adult life is as stable a trait as IQ. And so what happens in these shows is that the first half of the show, the people that run it are bringing people on the stage, getting them off the stage, finding that proportion of the audience who are extremely hypnotizable, and then they do the far out stuff with them.
Yeah, right.
Lying between two chairs and having someone sit on you, all that. About 2/3 of the adult population is at least somewhat, and about 15 to 20% are extremely hypnotizable. And there's about 1/3 who just aren't, but can use concepts that you use in hypnosis to help themselves change and feel better as well. The peak period of hypnotizability in the human life cycle is the latency years in childhood. So what that means is all 8-year-olds are in trances all the time. You call your kid in for dinner and he's out playing and he doesn't even hear you.
Yeah.
Hypnosis has been called believed in imagination. You're inhabiting this imagined world.
Yep.
And but we tend to lose some of our hypnotizability as we go through adolescence, where we go through what are called formal operations in developmental psychology, where you begin to value logic more than experience. You analyze things first and then decide what you're feeling. And so some of us do that to the extent that we lose much of our hypnotizability, but others preserve it despite that. And so it means that some people can have extreme, profound, rapid experiences in the hypnotic state, whereas others have it, then they think about it. We call them the diplomats. They go in and out. The poets are the ones who just experience it. And there are some who just are so sort of lead with their rationality so much that they're not very hypnotizable. We call them the researchers. And the first thing I do in regard to hypnosis with my patients is give them a standard 5-minute test of their hypnotizability. We call it the hypnotic induction profile. We ask them to imagine their hand is floating up in the air like a balloon. If you pull it down, it'll float right back up. And we see how hypnotizable they are. And it's something I can do remotely. I do in my office, but we actually on the Reverie app have a 5-minute hypnotizability test. You can find out for yourself how hypnotizable you are. So anytime you want to know, Brandon, I'm here for you.
Yeah, I really, it's like I said, I haven't spent like an incredible amount of time on, pursuing this path or anything, but the times I have sort of went down the path, I've been a little disappointed, like, because I would like to utilize the tool, and I'm excited about the app to actually dig in and be able to have that direct link to do so. So yeah, perhaps we can report back with some changes. So as far as the benefits, you've been obviously at this for a long time. Well, I guess a couple things. What exactly is going on in the brain during hypnosis? And then maybe we can go into what some of the most powerful use cases are.
So we've been very interested, and it's clear, the old language was, you are going to sleep. Well, you're not going to sleep in hypnosis, and EEG and functional magnetic resonance imaging and PET imaging studies all show that hypnosis is a form of resting alertness. It is not a form of sleep. And there are 3 basic things that happen in your brain when you go into a hypnotic state. One is you turn down activity. And we've done this with functional magnetic resonance imaging. We take high and low hypnotizable subjects, students and others, put them into a hypnotic state while they're in the scanner. And 3 things happen. One, you turn down activity in what's called the anterior cingulate cortex. The cingulate cortex is this part of the brain at the base, near the base of the brain. It's like a C on its edge. And the anterior, the front part, is part of what we call the salience network. It's a pattern matching part of the brain that says, something's happening, you better pay attention to. So you hear a loud noise that hijacks your attention, and you see whether there's somebody outside with a gun or something, and you have to do something about it.
Yeah.
It's what social media use to hijack attention. So suddenly you get a message that there are 12 girls out there who think they're prettier than you are, and it's a kind of threat to
What
yourself, and boom,
impossible.
you're off. Yeah, right. And so you turn down activity in that part of the brain, so you're less likely to be distracted. That allows you to intensify the focus of your attention. The second thing that happens is you increase functional connectivity. So when one part of the brain is active, the other part is active. Between the left dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, which is part of the executive control network, a part of the brain that hopefully I'm using now and talking to you to organize my thoughts and present them clearly, and the insula, which is insula is Latin for island. It's a little island of neural tissue in the middle of the base of the brain. And it's our mind-body relay. It's where the brain communicates to the body how to react. And also it manages interoception, how we perceive our bodies. And so in hypnosis, you have an exceptionally good ability to control how your body is feeling and acting and how you perceive it. The third thing is that there is inverse functional connectivity between the executive control region in the front and the posterior cingulate cortex. That's part of what we call the default mode network. It's a part of the brain where you sort of conceptualize who you are. If you're not doing much and just thinking, who am I? What am I like? What do people think of me? That's the default mode operating. That's how in hypnosis you can do things that ordinarily you wouldn't even think you could do, because you're not worried about whether it's consistent with your past behavior or what people will think of you. You just do it. Mm-hmm. So that capacity to kind of put yourself aside, which is part of a lot of interest now in therapeutic approaches of various kinds, including psychedelics.
Like ketamine, for example.
Get over yourself. Ketamine, right. Yeah. The dissociogenic drug. You're altering activity in that part of the brain, and you just try it and see what it's like. So even if you didn't think you could do it, you might surprise yourself and find that you can.
Yeah.
So those are the three major things that happen in hypnosis. It's a kind of resting focal alertness. In hypnosis, you intensify the focus of attention. We call that absorption. Highly hypnotizable people are the kind of people who get so lost in a sunset that they, come home late for dinner and forget three other things they're supposed to do. Or people who get so caught up in a good movie that they forget they're watching a movie and enter the imagined world. Mm-hmm. Hypnosis has been called believed in imagination. So absorption, focus is one component. The second is dissociation, putting outside of conscious awareness things that would ordinarily be in consciousness. Now, we do it all the time. Right now, Brandon, you're having sensations in your bottom touching the chair you're sitting in, I presume. Mm-hmm. But hopefully you weren't even aware of them until I mentioned it to you.
Right, exactly.
If you were, we could just stop now. But
it's a different kind of podcast.
Yeah, right. So that allows you to put outside of awareness things you'd rather not pay attention to sometimes, like pain, for example. So absorption, dissociation. And the third is this, what used to be called suggestibility, the thing that scares people about hypnosis, is really cognitive flexibility. It's saying, why don't I try out something I didn't think was possible and see what happens? So you can put those three things together: focused attention, dissociation, and cognitive flexibility. And it's a great matrix for change, for being different and seeing what it feels like. And that's how we use it.
Wow. Very, very fascinating. And, what comes to mind for me, well, one other question before I go there. What are some of the, one thing we didn't touch on, what are some of the most powerful, use cases? Obviously sleep you touched on.
Yes.
We know, of course, and I'm also curious, so many things come to mind, how this kind of ties into placebo effect and, sort of, believed imagination. It's like, we know that, what is it, like 30% of healings, including surgeries, are placebo. So how does that play in, and what are some of the best use cases here?
Well, one of the areas where placebos get the most attention are pain and anxiety. Mm-hmm. And hypnosis There are randomized clinical trials that show that hypnosis is highly effective in controlling pain and anxiety. We published one study in the leading British medical journal, The Lancet. It was a randomized clinical trial, 241 subjects who had to have arterial cut down. So you cut down into the artery at the top of the leg, you thread catheters through, you do chemoembolization of tumors in the liver, or visualize stenosis, the narrowing of arteries in parts of the circulatory system. It takes usually about 2.5 hours. We don't use general anesthesia for it. It's painful. It makes you anxious. And there were 3 conditions. One, everybody could push a button and give themselves IV opioids. So they would release a certain amount of opioids.
Mm-hmm.
That's standard care. 2, you have a friendly nurse trying to comfort you. So just genial, comforting warmth. And the 3rd is training in self-hypnosis to filter the hurt out of the pain. Imagine you're floating somewhere safe and comfortable. Picture yourself in your favorite vacation spot and let the doctors do what they have to do here. And after an hour and a half, the average pain level on a 0 to 10 scale was 5 out of 10 for the standard care groups. And they were pushing the button to give themselves opioids. In the friendly nurse condition, it was 3 out of 10. And in the hypnosis condition, it was 1 out of 10.
Wow.
And the hypnosis group was using half the pain meds, half the opioids that the standard care patients were.
Wow.
We measured their anxiety levels. The anxiety was 5 out of 10 for the standard care group, 3 out of 10 for the nursing group, and 0 in the hypnosis group.
Wow.
At an hour and a half. I was afraid they died or something. I mean, they were all just fine.
Wow.
They got done 17 minutes quicker on average.
Wow.
So not only were the patients more comfortable, but the medical staff were more comfortable, because the people weren't lying there squirming and groaning. They were very comfortable. And there were fewer procedural complications. So, part of what frustrates me, Brandon, is if I published a study like that in The Lancet, randomized clinical trial, only what I was using was a new drug instead of hypnosis, everybody would be using it now.
Yeah.
But no, people they just can't believe it. They think
no one can make money off of it. Exactly the same.
Bingo.
Way.
That's the other thing. So there's no mega company to send little detail people around to doctors and convince them it's the right thing to do, put these fancy ads on television, saying, tell your doctor about this drug.
Yeah.
And so that's one reason that hypnosis is so underutilized, is that there's no big corporations pushing it and convincing people that that's the thing to do.
Wow.
And so, and the thing that really frustrates me, Brandon, is last year, the Center for Disease Control reported that there were 82,000 opioid overdose deaths in the United States.
Wow.
82,000. There have been 300,000 deaths like that in the last 10 years in the United States. That's horrifying. It's worse than firearm deaths. It's worse than automobile accident deaths.
Wow.
And these are not deliberate overdoses. These are people who just think they can handle more than they can. They take some drug that's laced with fentanyl, which is 100 times more potent than morphine.
Yeah.
And they just go to sleep and they don't wake up.
Yeah.
Because it has a stronger effect on respiration than it does on pain.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's just horrifying that we are still using approaches that kill people.
Yeah.
And I'm here to tell you that hypnosis has never killed anybody. It's the worst thing that happens is it might not work. And so it's a tremendous opportunity that we are overlooking while we overutilize medications that are killing people.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, when the worst case scenario is you may get talked into using your shoes as binoculars for a few minutes, you survived that. But you
My shoes don't mind. That's all right. But, you mentioned the placebo effect. So placebo is a very powerful thing, up to a third of, with antidepressant medication, which I use with my patients, can be very helpful.
Mm-hmm.
I was at a meeting with a representative of a big pharma company at the National Institutes of Health, and he was really frustrated, he said, because there's about a third of people who just don't respond to antidepressant medications. 2/3 do, but half of them are a placebo response. So, and he said, and that's getting bigger from his point of view, worse, because the more antidepressants get a reputation as being really powerful treatments for depression, the more people get a placebo response. Placebo is basically the expectation that your interaction with a doctor is going to make you feel better.
Yeah.
And that expectation alone has a positive effect. However, a study was done a while ago where you put research subjects' hand in circulating ice water bath.
Mm-hmm.
So the circulation keeps your hand from warming the water near it, and it hurts when you're in really cold water. So the length of time you can keep your hand in that situation is a good measure of how much discomfort you're having.
Yeah.
And what was found was that for low hypnotizable people, placebo and hypnotic instructions were about equivalent. But for highly hypnotizable people, they could keep their hands in the water much longer
Wow.
than in the placebo condition. So hypnotic analgesia is more powerful than placebo analgesia, although there's an effect with placebo as well.
Wow. I'm curious. I touched on something earlier that, one of my interests that originally drew me into hypnosis was sort of some of these ideas of people going into a hypnotic state. I'm not sure if you're familiar with Michael Newton's book, Journey of Souls or Destiny of Souls, where,
No, I am.
yeah. And supposedly these books, what they recount is this doctor using hypnosis, and all of a sudden people started recounting supposed past lives. And it wasn't really what he was setting out to explore, and that started coming up, and then he would just kind of guide them through under the hypnotic state and then say, okay, well, tell me about it. All right, now you died, now what? And then it would go on to what their experiences was, sort of life between lives, if you will, beyond the veil, which obviously is getting very far off of what we've talked about thus far. So I'm just curious if you've explored any of that side of using hypnosis, and, if so, what your thoughts are.
Well, Brandon, I have enough trouble figuring out what's going on in this life. But I have not done any research in that area. Hypnosis has been called believed in imagination.
Mm-hmm.
And what can happen in hypnosis is you can visualize, conceptualize something that comes to seem very real.
Mm-hmm.
Now, whether that means it actually happened or not is another issue. And there's been debates about hypnosis for a while was widely used in police investigations.
Mm-hmm.
And people would, be hypnotized to get a clearer image of somebody who had tried to hurt them or something like that. The problem is that the fact that it feels so vivid can mean one of two things. Either it really happened that way, or you're having an intense image of what might have happened, the way you get absorbed in a movie.
Yeah.
And that's been one reason for concern, because people can come up with an intensified, better image of what happened. For example, the bus driver whose bus, you may remember the Chowchilla school bus kidnapping. It happened down there in Southern California. Some guys hijacked a bus full of school children and buried them under in a like a cave, and was holding them for ransom. Wow. And they asked the bus driver could not recall all the license plate of the car that overtook and hijacked the bus until he was hypnotized.
Wow.
And it turned out that he actually remembered all the numbers and the letters of the license plate in hypnosis correctly. The order was wrong, but it's one of the things that helped convict the people who did the hijacking. So there are times when you can actually come up with new correct information that was not previously available to consciousness. However, just like a movie can seem very intense and very real, and when you're in it, you're really in it, doesn't necessarily mean that what you're recalling is necessarily fact. Yeah. So I can say, all I can say about past life regression is that I'm sure hypnosis can make it seem more vivid. And whether that means it's accurate is a separate question that I can't address.
You know what I find interesting about it, and as I mentioned early on, it's something that drew me in originally. I can't say that I've had an experience where it felt like a profound remembering when I have sought to do so. So, but there's so many of these supposed stories and accounts out there, and one of the things that I find really interesting about it is there's some books written where people have gone, these individuals that could not, doctors couldn't figure out what was wrong with them, why the shoulder pain or whatever it is. And then through a past life regression, they have a memory, or at least an imagined memory of an experience in another lifetime where this thing happened. They sort of process it, go through that trauma, release it, and then they're healed. And I suppose based off of everything that we've said here, whether it really did happen or not, the experience of imagining and really being in that, let's call it a movie, in that movie, then allows them in some way, shape, or form to process and sort of create that placebo effect.
Well, whether it's symbolic, certainly I've had experiences of helping people work through real traumas that happen with a, tremendous improvement in their symptoms.
Right.
And so that process can happen. I was once demonstrating hypnosis to some Stanford students, and one of them volunteered, and he was very hypnotizable. And I was doing age regression. So I took him back to his 6th birthday party, and he starts talking like a little boy and smiling and giggling a little bit. And then I got him back to when he was an infant. And, and normally, I'll tickle or something like that, and they'll giggle. And I lit a match, and he would have grabbed the match, on the flame if I let him do it, like a little baby.
Wow.
But I started tickling him here, and he burst into tears and got very upset. And I said, okay, we won't do that anymore. And I tickled him somewhere else, and he was okay. And we came out of it, and I asked him, were you ever sick as a baby? And he said, well, I don't remember this, but my mother tells me that I was born with an abscess on my chest. So he had an infected wound.
Oh, wow.
And I was tickling him where the abscess was.
Interesting.
And so the answer was, for him, that was a true recollection in hypnosis of re-experiencing this discomfort he had when he was born.
Yeah.
And so, yes, you can get back to things like that really happen. But again, the fact that you have such an experience doesn't by itself prove that that's a veridical reporting of an experience, but it could be.
Yeah, right. It's certainly the fact that we can go back in this lifetime, I think, is that and recount things and experience as if you were the infant is interesting, assuming there is such a thing as other lifetimes, and that we're, have experienced those or will experience those or currently are, then it I suppose that would make sense that you could continue, and then there's a thread of connectivity. I'm curious, you talked about the license plate. Is, in your opinion, is this, everything stored in our subconscious somewhere? It's just a matter of accessing it on the hard drive, like what I had for dinner. If when I was 8 years old on a Tuesday, March 10th or whatever.
Well, certainly the brain is a remarkable organ that stores huge amounts of information. And our memory is sort of associative by nature. So, for example, when you go, have you ever gone back to where you went to primary school, and, you look around and the halls look a lot smaller than you thought when you were a kid. And, and you look at the lockers and you start thinking about, the time kids poured some water in your locker and got your books wet, or, something. So you will stimulate real associations that you just hadn't gotten to for decades, right?
Yeah.
And so the brain does that. Does it mean that the mind is like a video recorder? No, I don't think so. We recall patterns of associations, and memory is reconstructive. So you remember things, but you sort of put them together based on assumptions that if this is like what I felt like when I was there, then this must be what happened, kind of thing. So we can remember a tremendous amount that we ordinarily wouldn't think we would be able to remember. But is it all literally stored veridically? I doubt it. I doubt that the brain does that. But we can reassemble what we have recorded and make sense of it to a much greater extent than we usually give ourselves credit for. So, for example, people who develop Alzheimer's disease, who can't remember what they had for breakfast, because their memory is seriously disturbed. If you take them back to their hometown, they can find their way around town. They can't learn a new path,
Mm-hmm.
but they store in other parts of the brain the geographical associations that allow them to get from point A to point B.
Right.
So the brain has a lot more memory capacity than it even appears when we have problems with our memory.
Mm-hmm. I'm curious what what you talked about the different parts of the brain and exploring a lot of this sort of, let's say, metaphysical sort of stuff and extrasensory perception and things. You hear a lot about the pineal gland and that being sort of an access point. And I'm curious what your thoughts are on that whole thing.
Well, the pineal gland has to do with, among other things, regulating our circadian clock.
Mm-hmm.
Melatonin, it makes melatonin, which is the master regulator of day and night. So you have high melatonin levels at night and low during the day. It's very light sensitive. The pineal is right near where the optic nerves cross and carry light information to the back of the brain.
Hence them calling it the third eye in a sense, right?
Yeah, right. It may be that there are other sort of extrasensory things that it does, but what we know it does is help us regulate. And every cell in the body has a little circadian clock. It's a regulator of circadian rhythms. It has a tremendous amount to do with how we regulate and get sleep, and which is a tremendous regulator of our energy and ability for our brains to function properly. Again, if there are other extrasensory things the pineal does, and for a long time we didn't know what the pineal does. Now we do.
Yeah.
That may be it, but that's where my understanding of it ends. And there, there are other things people can think about, but from my perspective, it does a hell of a lot in helping us regulate our sleep and wakefulness cycles and keep ourselves mentally and physically healthy.
Yeah. Yeah. I saw something actually last night that kind of surprised me. I didn't realize that, sort of a well-known doctor, Dr. Drew, I forget what his last name is, but I'm sure you're probably familiar with. He was talking about this sort of stuff, which I'd never seen him kind of delve into. He's talking about a medium, well-known medium named Tyler Henry, who they had hooked him up when he was supposedly, doing his whole thing, mediumship and connecting with people beyond the veil, supposedly, and how, his brain waves changed dramatically, and they hadn't seen this before, and he sweats during the process. And, and so I thought that was I think it's really interesting when you start now, okay, we can see the changes in the brain when these sort of accessing these other tools are supposedly happening.
Well, there's no question that we can and do change the way our brains function. And in hypnosis, going into a hypnotic state, you get more theta activity in the left frontal region in particular. There's no question. And your brainwaves change dramatically when you go to sleep at night and when you're in rapid eye movement sleep. So we can, by changing our mental state, change the way our brains function. There's no question about that. And there's been some very interesting recent research that shows that the way, breathing is really an interesting thing, Brandon, because it's the one physiological activity that is part conscious and part unconscious. So right now, until I mention it, I'm sure you weren't thinking about how you were breathing.
Right.
And I'm sure your audience wasn't, hopefully. But once you think about it, you can immediately control it. You can take a deep breath. You can slowly exhale. And so it's right at the edge between conscious and unconscious control.
Mm-hmm.
And the brain, it turns out, regulates its own level of activity by changing the way you breathe. So long, slow exhales tend to soothe you. Sigh, we call it cyclic sighing, where you, as you let the air out, it conveys a kind of acceptance. It actually lowers heart rate. It slows heart rate. It's parasympathetic control. Whereas forced rapid inhalation tends to activate you. So Navy SEALs do something called box breathing, as what they call tactical breathing, where you get yourself aroused. And the brain can actually regulate its own level of activation by regulating how you breathe. So the brain is very clever at getting itself either activated or soothed depending on what it wants and what we want, and we can learn to control that.
Wow. Yeah. I'm curious, I mentioning breath work, it makes me think of practices like meditation as well. And how do you compare hypnosis with other practices like meditation?
Yeah, there's tremendous interest in meditation, and there are areas of overlap, and there are areas that are different. So,
Mm-hmm.
hypnosis is a kind of intensified focus, and it's Western. We do it to solve a problem. So, unlike the meditation movement, which has lots of people around proudly telling you that they're meditators and doing it regularly every day, I'm not trying to get a bunch of people wandering around in hypnotic states all the time. I'm trying to maybe a good idea. I don't know, but I'm trying to get people to use it for a purpose. And
Mm-hmm.
so, if people, for example, can prepare themselves to engage in a work activity like writing, for example, by focusing on what they're for while they get their body relaxed and comfortable. So they're not fidgety, they're focusing their attention, they're planning the steps that they want to take along the path to solve a problem. They may find that they get more engaged and focused using self-hypnosis in carrying out that task. With meditation, it's a little different. There are three major components to meditation. One of them is the body scan. So you do check out your body the way you can with hypnosis, imagining you're floating in a bath or like a hot tub. Only in meditation, you simply check it. You don't try to change how it feels. You simply are experiencing different parts of your body. The second is open presence. It's a very important principle of meditation where you're not trying to judge or evaluate or control what's happening. You just experience
Observing.
it, like letting a storm blow through you, just open presence. And the third is compassion, cultivating compassion for other people, for your body, all wonderful things. With hypnosis, it's absorption, dissociation, and cognitive flexibility. So you're doing things that are related, but they're not the same.
Mm-hmm.
And so, and in meditation, the neurophysiological studies have shown that you do, in particular, experienced meditators build up activity in their prefrontal cortex and turn down activity in the posterior cingulate cortex, the default mode. Getting over yourself is something you're supposed to do in meditation, and that's one sign that you're doing it. So the brain activity, the activity itself is similar, but it's not the same. And in hypnosis, we do it for a purpose. With meditation, you do it because it's a good thing to do.
Yeah. I'd love to hear, we always love stories on the show. And I'd love to hear any sort of success stories, any success stories that you could share.
Sure. Well, we've had people. Adam is a guy who said that he saw a picture of himself, a picture of a party he had been to.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, God, there's a guy who looks a lot like me, but he's got this huge stomach, and then he showed it to his son, who said, Dad, that's you. There wasn't anybody else dressed like you at the party. That's you. And he realized that he had put on a whole lot of weight, and he started using the Reverie app. And the way we focus on eating is to eat with respect for your body. For your body, too much food is damaging. Would you ever force more food than it needed into your baby's mouth or into your dog's or your cat's mouth? No.
Yep.
So don't focus on any desire to eat you have. Focus on your commitment to respect and protect your body.
I like that.
And we use the same kind of approach with smoking. Would you ever put tar and nicotine into the lungs of your baby? Hell no.
Right.
Well, your body's as dependent on you as your baby.
Yep.
So he started learning to eat with respect for his body. He realized that he could, in fact, eat more if he exercised more. So he started walking between Palo Alto and Mountain View, which is a pretty good walk where he worked. And he said, I used to, spend 5 minutes getting a parking space that was, 30 feet closer to the store. He said, now I look for the farthest away space if I drive there at all and enjoy the walk.
Yeah.
And he's lost 60 pounds.
Wow.
He's slim as a rail right now. Very proud of how he's doing.
Wow.
And he did it using self-hypnosis to refocus his attention and just focus on what he was for. We had a woman who was not very hypnotizable, but who used the Reverie app and got the concept of treating her body with respect. Not, there used to be ads on the freeways that said, "Are you dying for a smoke?" And people would think yes, and they'd light up. It was clever, but you focus on what you're for, not what you're against.
Right.
And after 2 sessions, she stopped smoking. I had
Wow.
one woman who was a social worker who had smoked for 25 years, and she signed up for one of our studies. And she said, "I just thought, it'd be fun to try it, and I'll get the free app and all this stuff." And she said, "I tried it in your lab at first, and I didn't like it. And I went home that night, and I tried focusing on respecting and protecting. My body smoking is a poison. I need my body to live. I owe my body respect and protection." I lit up a cigarette. I looked at it and said, "Feh, who needs this?" She put it out. She hasn't had a cigarette since. Her friends can't believe it. She's helping them all stop smoking now.
Wow.
And she said, "Doc, this is some kind of crazy ass voodoo shit. And I mean that in a good way."
Yeah. Right.
And one of the cool things is watch people surprise themselves. They just are surprised that they can make such a change so quickly.
Yeah.
And we've had thousands of people who get to sleep. They get easily to sleep, or if they wake up in the middle of the night, they can get themselves back to sleep very easily, focusing on what they're for. And so we've had people with dog phobias who get over their phobia. They get over their fear. I'll tell you a story about my father. He was treating a woman in Midtown Manhattan who had a dog phobia, and that's a bad place to have a dog phobia.
Yeah. Right.
She would actually try to calculate, when to go out on the street when there were less likely to be people with dogs. Good luck.
Wow.
She was at a fancy dinner party at a big hotel that her husband had thrown for some special guests, and a woman walked into the room with a little toy poodle, and she screamed, jumped up, knocked over the entire dinner table, wine, food everywhere.
Wow.
And her husband said, "You get fixed or we're done." And so he sort of brought her to my father's office and said, "Fix her or leave her here. I've had it." And so my father got her hypnotized and said, "I want you to think about the difference. It's not irrational to be afraid of animals. There are some wild animals that can harm you, but you need to think about the distinction between wild and tame animals. And be friendly to the tame animals and stay away from the wild ones. Now find a friend who you trust who has a dog and tell him to hold the dog, and you go up and pet it." So she thought to herself in hypnosis, dog friend. And she went and pet the dog. And she thought, great, I'm over this. Well, my father decided to call up about 6 months later and see how she was doing. And a little boy answered the phone, and he said, "Is your mama there?" And the boy said, "Yes, who is calling, please?" And my father said, "It's Dr. Spiegel." And the little boy said, "That's funny. Spiegel's in heat." She had gotten a dog and named it Spiegel.
It's actually a good dog name.
It is. So yeah, people can change in a hurry.
Mm-hmm.
And we've had thousands of people now using the app find that their pain levels are significantly reduced. And the nice thing is that this isn't something you have to, take my word for it and try it for a long time. People find within 15 minutes that their levels of stress are reduced. Their pain levels go down. I had one woman who had really bad lower back pain. She had a disc disease, and she got pregnant. And of course, as the baby grew, her back pain got worse. They couldn't give her meds because she was pregnant. They implanted a nerve stimulator in her back, didn't work. And I got her hypnotized, and I said, "I just want you to imagine now floating in the place where you naturally feel most comfortable." She said, "I love my bubble bath. I'm in the bath, the warmth." And I said, "All right, feel the warm, tingling numbness. Let it filter the hurt out of the pain." And her pain had been 7 out of 10 when we started. I asked her where it was. It was 3 out of 10. And she came out of the hypnosis and she looked angry. And I said, "What are you angry about?" And she said, "Why in the hell are you the last doctor I got sent to instead of the first?"
Wow.
And so, yeah, things like that can happen all the time. And people can learn. The nice thing is people worry about losing control with hypnosis, Brandon. They're gaining control. They're gaining control over symptoms and the way they handle them.
Yeah.
And they're also often surprised. And I love that look of surprise. What the hell's going on here? But I feel different. I feel better.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so you're enhancing their ability to control how they feel and how their body functions.
Yeah. Have you ever had anyone go into a state or something that surprised you? Something that was, like, what are you referencing? What is this? Anything that was just seemed out of the ordinary and inexplicable?
Well, I've never had anything that's totally inexplicable. I've had people who go back and relive some traumatic experience. One woman saw her husband being pulled off a horse and being killed,
Mm.
which apparently had actually happened. And
Wow.
and so I tried to comfort her and help her put this situation into perspective.
Wow. But was she there to witness it? Like,
Yeah, apparently she witnessed it. Yeah, it wasn't something that she didn't know about. She had
Okay,
witnessed
got
it
it.
and seen it. So I have not had people, have altered experiences that are hard to account for, hard to explain.
Gotcha.
But I have had people see things about experiences they've been through that change their perspective on what had happened.
See it from a new angle, sort of thing.
Yes, exactly.
Very cool. Well, this has been fascinating, Dr. Spiegel, and I'd love to, of course, tell the listeners how they can connect with you, follow you. Obviously, the Reverie app. I'd like to just share a little bit about that. We're going to put a link where people can get that as well. Yeah, share what's going on with your app.
So thank you, Brendan. So Reverie, about 4 years ago, I was speaking at a Brain Mind Summit, and a serial entrepreneur named Ariel Poehler, who went to MIT and Stanford Business School and has started Strava and some other very successful apps, said, "You wanna try and build a hypnosis app?" And I said, "Sure, let's do it." And so we started with the Alexa program because it was easy to program voice interaction.
Mm-hmm.
And what I was worried about is making it as much like the experience of being in my office as possible.
Sure.
So it's not simply a rote series of instructions. It's I ask a question, is your hand floating in the air? If it is, I go on to something else. If not, if people say no, then I give them more instructions about how to change sensation in their hand and so on. So it's very much like the experience of being in the office with me. And it seems to work pretty well. So we now have, about 10 different programs to help people with problems like phobias, pain, sleeping better, finding ways to deal with intensifying your focus, getting better at using your body and athletic performance. And we're finding that it can be very helpful. We've had about 500,000 downloads.
Amazing.
People are using it to lose weight, stop smoking, all kinds of things. And I used to worry, Brendan, is it as good as being there with me? And then it occurred to me that, like the problem that your partner has sometimes, if you wake up in the middle of the night, you probably don't want me in your bedroom telling you how to get back to sleep. But
Fair.
You've got me on the app, and
Right,
so you can hear what I would say were I there.
Yeah.
And so we welcome people giving Reverie a try. The first week is free, and you can see what it feels like. And you just go to, you can download the Reverie app from the App Store if you have an iOS phone, from Google Play if you have an Android, and give it a try. See what it's like. It's all voice activated, so you do it. You set it up on your smartphone, and then we have auditory interaction, so you can keep your eyes closed, stay in the state of focused attention, and carry out one of the programs that we have to deal with the problem that you select you want help with. And we welcome people giving Reverie a try and seeing if it can't help people. And we have many people who have changed their lives using it.
Amazing. And that's spelled Reveri, correct?
That's correct.
Yeah.
That's correct.
Very cool. Well, I look forward to giving it a try myself, and
Great.
yeah, I'll let you guys know if I had some self-hypnosis success. It feels like even utilizing a tool like this, I think will be better suited than for me personally, just intuitively. Than okay, I've got an hour here, I better get it right, or else it's just on to the next patient or whatever.
No.
So that's
Right.
really cool.
Right. That's it. You can use it as much as you want, as often as you want.
Yeah. Excellent. And then for those who would want to follow you and your work, are you on social media, or is there a good place to do that? Website?
Yes, at David Spiegel, and I'm on Instagram and I'm on Facebook, and we also have a website, www.reverie.com.
Excellent.
And so the latest that we're learning, and if you're interested in some of the studies that back up what we do, you can access them on the website as well.
Excellent. Well, I do have one final question for you here, and it is my cliche closer. In 60 seconds or less, what is the meaning of life, according to Dr. David Spiegel?
Whoa. I would say that the meaning of life is relationships. It's how we relate to our own selves, and using hypnosis is one way to expand and deepen the way we relate to ourselves. It's the way we relate to other people. Meaning in our lives grows as we give meaning to other people, and we grow as we receive meaning from other people.
Yeah.
And we found in coping with stress and coping with pain and treating women dying of breast cancer that one of the most powerful things we can do is help them connect with one another in facing whatever it is they have to face. So I would say our ability to relate and connect is what gives meaning to ourselves, meaning to our loved ones, and meaning to life.
Beautifully said. Thank you so much for taking the time to share your insights and the work that you're doing. And thank all of you out there for tuning in your beautiful brainwaves and incredible hearts to another episode. Until next time, journey well. I love you so, so, so